Gladiators. Today, we remember them only as warriors who killed and died in the arena. But what if I told you that everything you know might be wrong? In reality, gladiators were ancient Rome's biggest superstars. Like Hollywood celebrities, they had fans. Politicians competed for their endorsement. And some, with the fame they earned in the arena, even challenged emperors. So what existed in the secret world of these legendary warriors? Where did they live at night? How were they trained?
Hail, champion.
Why were some gladiators richer, more popular, and more powerful than ordinary citizens? In this video, we will uncover a truth buried beneath the sands of history. Gladiators were not just fighting machines. They were Rome's greatest phenomenon. If you are ready, the arena gates are opening. But before we step into that blood-soaked sand, we need to understand something fundamental, something that will shock you, something that Hollywood got completely wrong.
73 AD, the Colosseum, not yet called that, still the Flavian Amphitheater. 50,000 Romans packed into stone seats. The roar is deafening. They are not here for politics, not for religion. They are here for him, Flamma, the Syrian gladiator. 21 victories, 4 times offered freedom. 4 times he refused. Because inside the arena he is a god. Outside, he is nothing. The gates open, sand flies. 2 men enter. Flamma, scarred and massive. His opponent? Younger, faster, desperate. The crowd screams Flamma's name. Women throw flowers. Men bet fortunes. Children clutch clay figurines of their hero. This is not execution. This is entertainment. This is celebrity. This is the contradiction that defined gladiatorial combat. Because here is the truth that will shatter everything you thought you knew. Gladiators were simultaneously the most famous and most despised people in Rome. Let that sink in. The most famous and the most despised. How is that possible? The answer lies in a single Latin word, infamia. Infamia was a legal status in Roman society. It meant without honor, and it applied to a specific group of people: prostitutes, criminals, actors, and gladiators. Yes, gladiators were legally classified alongside prostitutes and thieves. They had no voting rights. They could not testify in court. They could not hold public office. Their children inherited their shame. Even if a gladiator won his freedom, the stain of infamy followed him forever. This was Roman law, cold, absolute, unforgiving. But walk through the streets of Rome on the day before the games and you would see something completely different. You would see Flamma's face painted on walls, graffiti declaring his victories, women swooning as he passed, men begging for autographs, children playing gladiator with wooden swords, each one pretending to be him. The contradiction was insane. Legally, Flamma was worth less than a citizen. Socially, he was worth more than a senator. Why? How did Rome justify this madness? The answer is simple. Romans were hypocrites. Magnificent, entertaining, bloodthirsty hypocrites. They needed to maintain the illusion of moral superiority. Gladiators killed for entertainment. That was shameful, degrading, beneath the dignity of a true Roman citizen. Therefore, gladiators must be infames, outcasts, lesser beings. But Romans also loved violence, craved spectacle, worshipped strength, and gladiators provided all three. They were everything Rome officially despised and secretly desired. This created a bizarre social dynamic. A senator would never acknowledge a gladiator as an equal, but that same senator would pay a fortune to have Flamma fight at his games, would brag about it to his peers, would use the gladiator's fame to boost his own political career. Emperors were even worse. They publicly condemned the games as barbaric. then privately sponsored the most expensive matches in history. Some emperors even fought in the arena themselves, cosplaying as gladiators while actual gladiators died around them. The hypocrisy was staggering, but it worked, because Romans had mastered the art of cognitive dissonance. They could simultaneously despise and adore the same person, could declare someone worthless while paying them a fortune, could strip them of legal rights while granting them social immortality.
Flama understood this better than anyone. He knew he would never be a citizen, never vote, never own property without restrictions. But he also knew something more important. Fame transcends law. Inside the arena, the law did not matter, status did not matter, birth did not matter. Only one thing mattered: victory. And Flama was very good at victory. His record was legendary: 21 wins, 4 draws, 0 losses. In a profession where most men died within a year, Flama had survived for over a decade. He had been offered the rudis, the wooden sword of freedom, 4 separate times. Each time, he refused. Why? Why would a man choose slavery over freedom? Because Flama had discovered something that few men ever learn. Sometimes the cage is more comfortable than the world outside. As a free man, Flama would be infamous, jobless, worthless. But as a gladiator, he was a star. He had food, shelter, medical care, adoration, purpose. The arena was his kingdom, and he was not ready to abdicate. But Flama's story raises a darker question, a question that historians argue about to this day. Were gladiators slaves or celebrities, victims or volunteers, prisoners or professionals? The answer is complicated, because gladiators came from different backgrounds. Some were slaves, captured in war, forced to fight. Some were criminals, sentenced to the arena as punishment. These men had no choice: fight or die. But others volunteered. Yes, free Roman citizens, desperate for money or fame or excitement, would sign contracts to become gladiators. They would legally sell themselves into temporary slavery, give up their rights, submit to brutal training, risk death, all for a chance at glory. This shocks modern sensibilities. Why would anyone choose this? But put yourself in their sandals. You are a poor Roman, no land, no job, no prospects. You can work as a laborer for pennies, breaking your back in obscurity. Or you can enter the arena. Risk death, yes, but if you survive, fame, fortune, women, respect from the masses, even if not from the law. For many, it was an easy choice. The Roman poet Juvenal wrote bitterly about this phenomenon. He described noblemen born into wealth who threw it all away to become gladiators, not for money, for thrill, for the roar of the crowd, for the addiction of violence. These men were called octorati, volunteers, and they were both admired and despised. Admired for their courage, despised for their stupidity, because choosing to be infamous was considered the ultimate degradation. But the crowds did not care about legal distinctions, slave or volunteer, criminal or nobleman. Once you entered the arena, you were a gladiator. And if you were good, you were a god. This is the paradox at the heart of gladiatorial combat, a system that simultaneously elevated and degraded the same people, that made celebrities out of slaves and slaves out of celebrities, that proved Rome's greatness while exposing its cruelty. And Flama, standing in the sand, blood on his sword, roar of 50,000 in his ears, understood this perfectly. He was a god and a worm, a hero and a criminal, famous and worthless. But here is what the law could not take from him: legacy. because long after the senators who despised him were forgotten, Flama's name would endure, carved in stone, whispered in awe, remembered, not as a slave, but as a legend.
The crowd screams for blood. Flama's opponent is on his knees, wounded, exhausted, finished. The crowd's thumb burns. Down. Death. Execute him. But wait. Stop. Rewind. Because this is where Hollywood lied to you. That famous thumbs down signal probably never happened. Or if it did, it meant the opposite of what you think. Roman historians are not even sure what the gesture was. Some evidence suggests thumbs up meant death. Thumbs hidden meant mercy. The whole thing is confused. But here is what matters more. The assumption that every match ended in death is completely wrong. Let me tell you about the economy of gladiators. Because Rome was not stupid. Romans were brutal, yes, but they were also businessmen. And killing your investment is bad business. A gladiator was expensive, incredibly expensive. Training took years. Equipment cost a fortune. Food, housing, medical care, all of it added up. A top-tier gladiator like Flama was worth more than most citizens would earn in their entire lives. So when the lanista, the gladiator owner, sent his fighter into the arena, he was not thinking about honor or glory. He was thinking about return on investment. Imagine you are a lanista. You have spent years training a gladiator, thousands of denarii on equipment, doctors, trainers. Finally, he is ready. He fights. He wins. The crowd loves him. You can rent him out for more matches, more money, more profit. Then one day, some politician hosting games decides your gladiator should die for entertainment. Your investment, gone, wasted, for applause. This is why most matches did not end in death, because the lanista had contracts, agreements, insurance. If a sponsor wanted a gladiator killed, they had to pay compensation, huge compensation. Often more than the cost of hosting the entire games. Most sponsors could not afford that. So instead, matches were designed to be spectacular, but survivable. Blood, yes. Wounds, yes. But death? Only if absolutely necessary. Studies of gladiator graves reveal the truth. Mortality rate per fight was around 10 to 20%. Not 100%. Not even 50%. 10 to 20. That means most gladiators survived most fights. Flama's record of 21 victories without a loss was rare, but not impossible, because the system was designed for survival. But how? How do you have spectacular combat without constant death? The answer is rules. Yes, rules. The arena was not chaos. It was choreographed violence, controlled savagery. There were referees, doctors, procedures. When a gladiator was wounded badly, he had options. He could raise a finger, a signal of surrender. The referee would halt the match immediately. The wounded man's fate then depended on several factors.
First, the sponsor of the games. He paid for everything. He had final say. But he also had to consider public opinion, because the crowd had a voice. If they loved the wounded gladiator, if he had fought bravely, they would demand mercy. And sponsors who ignored the crowd risked riots. Second, the lanista. If the wounded gladiator was valuable, the lanista could negotiate, offer compensation, promise a rematch, anything to save his investment. Third, the gladiator's own reputation. A coward who surrendered at the first scratch, the crowd wanted him dead. But a warrior who fought to exhaustion, who showed courage even in defeat, the crowd would chant for his life. This created a bizarre incentive structure. Gladiators were encouraged to fight spectacularly, not suicidally, to bleed dramatically, to make the crowd gasp, but not to die stupidly.
Because survival meant another match, another payday, another chance at fame. Flama understood this perfectly. His fighting style was not reckless, it was calculated. He knew when to attack, when to defend, when to make it look desperate, even when he was in control. He was not just a fighter, he was a performer. And the crowd loved him for it. Because they did not really want death, they wanted drama. They wanted to believe death was possible. They wanted the thrill of danger without the guilt of constant slaughter. This is why gladiatorial combat lasted for centuries. If every match ended in death, the supply of gladiators would have run out immediately. Training new ones took years. The system would collapse. But with a 10 to 20% mortality rate, sustainable, profitable, endless. Of course, some matches were different. Executions disguised as combat. Criminals with no training thrown to professional killers or wild beasts. Those men died always. But they were not gladiators. They were condemned prisoners. And the crowd knew the difference. Real gladiatorial matches between trained professionals were something else entirely. They were sport. Violent, bloody sport, but sport nonetheless. With rules, referees, medical teams standing by. After the match, win or lose, if the gladiator survived, doctors rushed in. Rome's best doctors, because gladiators received better medical care than 99% of the population. Why? Because they were valuable, worth saving, worth healing. This is the reality Hollywood never shows you. Gladiators were not suicidal kamikaze warriors. They were professionals trying to survive long enough to retire rich. And the system supported that goal. Because dead gladiators do not sell tickets. Living legends do. So when Flama's opponent fell to his knees that day and the crowd screamed, Flama did not automatically kill him. He looked to the sponsor, to the referee. He calculated, weighed options, made the decision that would keep the crowd happy, the sponsor satisfied, and himself alive for another match. Because that was the game. Not dying gloriously, surviving profitably. And Flama was very, very good at the game.
But survival was only part of the equation. Because Flama was not just trying to stay alive. He was building something far more valuable. Something that transcended the arena. Something that would make him immortal. Fame. Walk through Pompeii today, 2,000 years later, and you can still see it, scratched into walls, carved into stone, graffiti declaring gladiatorial glory. Salatus the Thracian makes the girls sigh. Crescens the net fighter, master of 3 victories, who catches girls by night. These are not modern inventions. These are actual Roman graffiti, preserved by volcanic ash, written by fans who worshipped gladiators like we worship athletes today. Think about that. 2,000 years ago, teenage girls were writing fan graffiti about their favorite gladiators, just like modern fans tweet about football players or movie stars. The parallels are stunning. Gladiators were the first influencers, the first celebrities whose fame transcended their actual profession. They were not just fighters, they were brands. And like all good brands, they had merchandise. Archaeologists have found clay figurines of famous gladiators, small action figures that Roman children played with. Parents bought these toys for their kids. Collectors traded them. Some were even buried with their owners, treasured possessions taken to the afterlife. Imagine a Roman father buying his son a miniature Flama. The boy plays with it, pretends to be his hero, dreams of arena glory. This was not unusual. This was normal. Gladiators were everywhere in Roman culture. They appeared on mosaics, on pottery, on lamps, on jewelry. Their images sold products. Their names boosted sales. A wine merchant would advertise that Flama drank his wine. A blacksmith would claim that Crescens used his weapons.
modern product endorsement 2,000 years ago. But the influence went deeper, much deeper, into places that would shock even the most liberal Roman moralists. The bedroom. Here is where the story gets truly bizarre, where the contradiction between legal status and social worship becomes almost incomprehensible. Roman noblewomen were obsessed with gladiators. Not just admiration, not just fan worship, sexual obsession, documented, undeniable, scandalous. The poet Juvenal wrote mockingly about a senator's wife who abandoned her husband to run away with a gladiator. He called it the ultimate degradation, a woman of status choosing an infamous over her own class. But it happened, repeatedly, because gladiators represented something Roman noblemen could not: raw masculinity, physical power, danger, violence, everything Rome's civilized society tried to suppress. And Roman women wanted it. So this created a market, a disturbing, profitable market. After matches, when gladiators returned to their training schools, attendants would use a tool called a strigil, a curved metal scraper. They would scrape the sweat, oil, blood, and dirt from the gladiator's body. This mixture, this disgusting cocktail of bodily fluids and arena sand, was collected, bottled, and sold to wealthy women as an aphrodisiac. Let that sink in. Roman noblewomen paid money for jars of gladiator sweat. They rubbed it on their skin, mixed it with perfumes, believed it would make them irresistible, believed it contained the gladiator's masculine power. This is not speculation. This is documented in Roman sources. Pliny the Elder, the famous naturalist, wrote about it. With disgust, yes, but he confirmed it happened. But it gets worse, or stranger, depending on your perspective. Gladiator blood was also sold as medicine. Romans believed that drinking the blood of a fallen gladiator could cure epilepsy, that the warrior's strength would transfer to the sick person. So after executions, after fatal matches, people would rush into the arena, cup the blood, drink it warm, right there in the sand. Doctors prescribed it, philosophers debated its efficacy, and desperate families paid fortunes for it. This was the reality of gladiatorial fame. They were simultaneously revered and commodified, worshipped and consumed. Their bodies, even their fluids, became products. But some gladiators leveraged this fame into actual power, real influence. Not just social, political. Sponsors competed to feature famous gladiators at their games, because the right gladiator could make or break a politician's career. If you hosted games and Flama fought, the crowd loved you, voted for you, supported you. This gave top gladiators negotiating power. They could demand higher fees, better conditions, special privileges. Some even demanded a cut of the gate receipts. Flama reportedly negotiated his own contracts, chose his opponents, refused matches he considered beneath him. For a slave, this was unthinkable. But Flama was not just a slave. He was a brand. And brands have leverage. This is why some gladiators became wealthier than citizens, why they lived in luxury despite their legal status, why emperors invited them to private dinners despite publicly condemning them. Because fame, real fame, transcends law. It creates its own rules, its own economy, its own power structure. And in Rome, where spectacle was power, gladiators were kings. Infamous kings, slave kings, but kings nonetheless. The arena had given them what Roman society never could: immortality, not legal, not political, but cultural. Their names would outlive senators, outlive emperors, outlive Rome itself. carved in stone, scratched on walls, whispered in awe, not as citizens, but as legends.
But fame required fuel, physical fuel, because gladiators were not just performers, they were athletes. Their bodies were their livelihood, their survival depended on strength, endurance, and most importantly, the right diet. So what did gladiators eat? What fueled these ancient superstars? Hollywood shows us muscular warriors with chiseled physiques, lean, defined, like bodybuilders. Wrong. Completely wrong. Gladiators were fat, not obese, but definitely carrying extra weight, a layer of subcutaneous fat covering their muscles. And this was intentional, carefully cultivated, essential for survival. The evidence comes from multiple sources: ancient medical texts, skeletal remains, contemporary descriptions, all point to the same conclusion: gladiators were built like heavyweight fighters, not gymnasts. Why? Simple physics. Fat saves lives. When a sword cuts your skin, it first has to pass through whatever tissue lies on top of the muscle. If you are lean, that sword reaches vital blood vessels immediately. You bleed out quickly. But if you have a layer of fat, that fat absorbs the cut. The sword stops before reaching deep vessels. You bleed, yes, spectacular for the crowd, but you survive. This was not accidental. Lannister understood this. Doctors understood this. Trainers understood this. A thin gladiator was a dead gladiator. A slightly fat gladiator was a profitable investment. But how do you make professional fighters fat, especially when they train for hours every day? The answer is diet, specifically carbohydrates, massive amounts of carbohydrates. Gladiators had a nickname, hordeari, barley men, because their diet consisted primarily of barley, not meat, not protein, barley. Modern nutritionists would have a heart attack. Professional athletes eating almost pure carbs? No lean protein? Where is the muscle-building nutrition? But Romans were not stupid. They had centuries of experience. They knew what worked, and barley worked. Archaeological evidence supports this. Analysis of gladiator bones shows they consumed far more plant-based foods than the average Roman. Their strontium levels are high, indicating heavy grain consumption. Their calcium levels show they drank a special drink, vinegar mixed with plant ash, a calcium supplement to strengthen bones. Their typical meal was simple: barley porridge, beans, lentils, occasionally dried fruit, very rarely meat, maybe once a week, if that. This diet had multiple benefits. First, it was cheap. Lannister could feed dozens of gladiators affordably. Second, it provided sustained energy. Complex carbohydrates fuel endurance training better than protein, and most importantly, it built that life-saving fat layer. But wait, you might ask, how did they build muscle on this diet? Where is the protein? The answer is legumes. Beans and lentils contain enough protein to maintain muscle mass, especially when combined with intense training. Not optimal by modern standards, but sufficient. And remember, gladiators were not bodybuilders. They were not trying to maximize muscle definition. They were trying to maximize survival. That meant being strong enough to fight, but padded enough to absorb damage. Contemporary Romans mocked this diet, called gladiators barley eaters as an insult, implied they were like animals fed cheap grain. Elite Romans ate meat, fish, delicacies. They looked down on gladiator food as peasant fare. But the gladiators did not care, because their diet worked. It kept them alive, and alive gladiators made money. After training, gladiators would rest, massage, soak in warm baths. The ludus, the gladiator school, provided these luxuries, not out of kindness, out of economic necessity. Sore muscles do not perform. Injured fighters do not generate profit. So gladiators received treatment that ordinary Romans could never afford. The best trainers, the best facilities, the best medical care, all because they were valuable investments. This creates another paradox. Gladiators lived better than most free citizens. Better food, better housing, better health care, yet they had no freedom, no rights, no legal status. A poor Roman freeman might starve in a slum, work brutal manual labor, die of an infected tooth because he cannot afford a doctor. Meanwhile, a gladiator slave eats regularly, sleeps in a clean bed, receives medical attention from Rome's finest physicians. Which one was truly better off, the freeman dying of poverty or the slave living in relative comfort? The answer was not obvious, and this ambiguity is why some free citizens volunteered for gladiatorial service. They looked at their options and chose the cage because the cage had better food. But there was one thing barley could not provide, one thing no amount of porridge could replace, and it was slowly killing every gladiator, regardless of their fame or their victories. The weight of knowing that tomorrow you might have to kill your friend, or worse, he might have to kill you. Because inside the ludus, gladiators were not just fighters, they were familia, family, and family was about to be tested in the most brutal way possible.
The ludus, the gladiator school. From the outside, it looked like a prison. High walls, armed guards, locked cells, no escape. But inside, it was something stranger, something more complex, something that defied simple categories. Welcome to the Familia Gladiatoria, the gladiator family. This was not a metaphor, this was the actual term Romans used. Gladiators were not called prisoners or slaves or fighters, they were called brothers, members of a familia, a household, a unit. And like any family, they lived together, trained together, ate together, slept in adjacent cells, shared jokes, shared fears, formed bonds. This was intentional, designed, because isolated men become unpredictable, dangerous. But men with brothers, men with bonds, they are controllable, manageable, loyal to the group. Flamma had brothers, men he trained with for years, men who knew his fighting style better than he did, men who corrected his form, warned him about bad habits, celebrated his victories. These were not casual acquaintances. These were relationships forged through shared suffering, through blood and sweat and fear, the kind of bonds that only form when death is a constant companion. Every morning they woke together, exercised together, drilled together. The training was brutal, hours of repetition, wooden swords against wooden posts, shields bashing shields, footwork drills until legs collapsed. But it was also communal. A veteran would coach a novice. A retiarius would spar with a murmillo. Different fighting styles learning from each other, teaching, adapting, evolving. At meals, they sat together, ate the same barley porridge, complained about the same trainers, told the same stories. This was normal life, mundane, almost comfortable, until fight day arrived. And then the familia turned into a nightmare. Because here was the cruel mathematics of the ludus. Gladiators from the same school often fought each other. Not always, but often enough. The sponsors did not care about friendships, they cared about spectacle. And sometimes the best spectacle was brother against brother. Imagine it. You train with a man for 2 years. He teaches you his techniques. You learn his weaknesses. You share meals, jokes, fears.
He becomes your friend, your brother. Then one day the lanista tells you, tomorrow you fight him. To the death, possibly, in front of 50,000 screaming Romans for their entertainment. What do? Refuse? You cannot refuse. Refusal means punishment, torture, death. Your contract is absolute. You fight who you are told to fight, no exceptions. Plead? To whom? The lanista does not care about your feelings. The sponsor wants entertainment. The crowd wants blood. Your friendship is irrelevant. So you fight, because you have no choice. But how do you fight a brother? How do you try to kill someone you care about? How do you look into his eyes and thrust your sword toward his heart? The Romans had an answer. Not a good answer, but an answer. They called it professio, professionalism. Inside the ludus, you are brothers. Inside the arena, you are gladiators. The two identities must remain separate, compartmentalized. What happens in the sand stays in the sand. When the gates close, you are brothers again. This sounds insane, psychologically impossible. But gladiators did it, had to do it, because the alternative was madness. Some gladiators developed rituals. Before entering the arena, they would embrace their opponent, whisper forgiveness, promise to make it quick if it came to that. Then they would fight without mercy, because that was the job. That was survival. After the match, if both survived, they would return to the ludus, sit at the same table, eat the same food, complained about the same trainers, told the same stories. This was normal life, mundane, almost comfortable, until fight day arrived. And then the familia turned into a nightmare, because this created psychological trauma that modern soldiers would recognize. Moral injury, the wound that comes not from physical harm, but from violating your own values, from doing things you know are wrong but cannot avoid. Some gladiators coped by becoming emotionless, shutting down, treating every fight as mechanical, detached. These men became efficient killers, but also dead inside, hollowed out. Others coped through dark humor, joking about death, making light of violence, laughing at the absurdity of their situation, gallows humor, ancient style. And some simply broke, went mad, refused to fight. These men were punished brutally, made examples, because the ludus could not tolerate weakness, could not afford compassion. But here is the strange thing. Despite this horror, despite the forced fratricide, the familia bond often held, even strengthened, because shared trauma creates intense loyalty. Men who survive hell together become inseparable. Gladiators would risk their lives to protect their brothers, not in the arena where rules prevented interference, but in the ludus. If one brother was being abused by a trainer, others would intervene. If one was sick, others would share their food. If one was killed in the arena, others would honor his memory, carve his name, tell his story. This was the paradox of the familia gladiatoria, a brotherhood built on betrayal, a family that might kill each other, a bond stronger than blood, forged through blood. Flamma had lost brothers, many brothers, some to disease, some to accidents, some to the arena, some by his own hand possibly. The records do not say, but statistically almost certain. And yet he stayed, refused freedom 4 times. Why? Perhaps because the familia was all he had. Perhaps because freedom meant losing his brothers. Perhaps because the ludus,
horrible as it was home. Or perhaps something darker. Perhaps killing his brothers was the price he was willing to pay. For fame, for glory, for immortality. We will never know, because Flamma never wrote his story, and gladiators did not keep diaries. Their inner lives remain a mystery, lost to time. But their legacy remains, not just in victories, in something else, something they fought for, something that made all the horror worthwhile. The rudis, the wooden sword, the symbol of freedom. And it was closer than Flamma ever admitted.
Every gladiator dreamed of it, prayed for it, fought for it. The rudis, a simple wooden sword, no edge, no weight, no combat value whatsoever, but worth more than gold, because it meant freedom. The rudis was not given lightly. You could not buy it with money, could not inherit it, could not steal it. You earned it, through victories, through survival, through years of blood and sand. The criteria varied. Some Lanistae granted freedom after a certain number of wins. Others never granted it at all, preferring to work their gladiators to death. But in theory, if you fought well enough, long enough, bravely enough, eventually Rome would acknowledge your service, and you would be free. The ceremony was public. Arena, crowd. The gladiator would kneel. The sponsor, or sometimes the emperor himself, would present the rudis. The crowd would cheer. The chains, metaphorical and sometimes literal, would fall away. Free. Finally free. Except, not really. Because even with the rudis, you remained infames, legally dishonored. Your rights were limited. Your status remained low. You were free, yes, but not equal. So what did retired gladiators do? Where did they go? Some returned to their homelands, tried to rebuild the lives they lost. But most found this impossible. Years in the arena changed you, made you incompatible with normal society. The skills that kept you alive in the ludus were useless in a village. Worse, they made you dangerous, disturbing. Others stayed in the gladiatorial world, became trainers, doctores, teaching new recruits the techniques that kept them alive. This was common, profitable, and it made sense. Who better to train gladiators than a survivor? Some became guards, bodyguards for wealthy Romans who wanted intimidating protection. A retired gladiator standing at your door sent a message, "Do not mess with this household." A few became Lanistae themselves, bought or opened their own gladiator schools, turned their hard-won knowledge into a business. These men became wealthy, powerful, but still infames, still looked down upon by respectable society. And a rare few became something else entirely. Celebrities who leveraged their fame into lasting careers, endorsements, public appearances, consultation fees, the ancient equivalent of athlete turned commentator. But all of this assumed you wanted freedom. And here is where Flamma's story becomes truly baffling. He was offered the rudis 4 times, 4 separate occasions after accumulated victories that would have freed most gladiators twice over. Each time, massive crowds. Each time, the sponsor ready to grant him liberty. Each time, Flamma said no. Why? What rational reason could explain this? Some historians suggest practical economics. As a free man, Flamma would have to support himself, find work, compete in an economy that despised his background. But as a gladiator, he had guaranteed food, shelter, medical care,
and enormous fees for fighting. He was rich by gladiator standards. Why give that up for uncertain freedom? Others suggest psychological dependency. After years in the ludus, freedom might have terrified him. The structure, the routine, the clear purpose, all gone, replaced with uncertainty, meaninglessness. Better the cage you know than the freedom you fear. Still others suggest pride. Flamma was the best. Everyone knew it. Retiring meant admitting age, weakness, decline. But fighting meant proving again and again that he was still the champion, still relevant, still feared. Or perhaps something simpler. Perhaps Flamma loved it. The roar of the crowd, the rush of combat, the feeling of standing victorious in the sand while 50,000 people screamed his name. Perhaps nothing in freedom could match that high. We romanticize freedom, assume everyone wants it, craves it. But humans are complicated. Sometimes the cage is comfortable. Sometimes purpose matters more than liberty. Sometimes being the best at something, even something horrible, is enough. Flamma died as a gladiator. Not in the arena, surprisingly. He lived to age 30, ancient for his profession. His tombstone, discovered centuries later, lists his remarkable record: 21 victories, 9 draws, 4 times offered freedom, 4 times refused. The inscription ends with a simple phrase: Flamma secator, lived 30 years, fought 34 times. No judgment, no explanation, just facts, as if his choices were perfectly logical. Perhaps to him they were. But his story raises uncomfortable questions about freedom itself. Is a comfortable cage better than a hostile world? Is purpose under constraint better than meaningless liberty? Is fame worth slavery? Rome never answered these questions, did not even ask them, because Rome was not interested in philosophy. Rome was interested in spectacle, and spectacle required gladiators, willing or not. The system worked because it offered hope, the rudis, the possibility of freedom, even if most never achieved it, even if achieving it might not be worth it. The hope itself was enough. It kept men fighting, it kept them obedient, it kept them profitable. And occasionally, it created legends, men like Flamma, who could have been free, should have been free, but chose the sand, chose the sword, chose the roar.
But while Flamma chose the arena, others had no choice at all. Because not every gladiator was a volunteer. Not every fighter dreamed of glory. Some were dragged into the sand in chains. And their story is darker, far darker. Prisoners of war, the most common source of gladiators. When Rome conquered a territory, they did not just take the land. They took the people. Soldiers, rebels, anyone who resisted. These men were property, spoils of war, and many ended up in the ludus. No contracts, no negotiations, no possibility of refusing. You fought because you were told to fight. You died because it entertained Romans. Your life had no value except as spectacle. Some of these men were warriors before capture, trained soldiers, experienced fighters. For them, the transition to gladiator was almost logical. They already knew combat. The arena just changed the audience. But others were farmers, merchants, craftsmen, men who had never held a weapon, captured during Rome's endless expansion, enslaved, broken, forced into a profession they never chose.
These men faced the worst odds. No fame to protect them, no fans to demand mercy, no negotiating power. They were expendable, anonymous, forgotten. Training for these condemned prisoners was minimal. Teach them to hold a weapon, teach them not to run, then throw them into the arena and let entertainment happen. If they died quickly, fine. If they fought well, surprising. Either way, the crowd was satisfied. This was the hidden reality beneath gladiatorial glory. For every flama who became famous, hundreds of nameless men died in the sand. No tombstones, no records, no graffiti declaring their victories, just bodies, buried in mass graves outside the city. Archaeological evidence confirms this. Gladiator cemeteries show a divide. Some graves are elaborate, named, honored. These were the successful fighters, the ones who mattered. But most graves are simple, unmarked, bones thrown together without ceremony. These were the expendables, the ones who fought once or twice and died, the ones Rome forgot. And then there were the bestiarii, beast fighters, men forced to face animals in the arena, lions, bears, bulls. This was not gladiatorial combat. This was execution with extra steps. Some bestiarii were criminals, sentenced to death in the arena as punishment, but others were simply unlucky. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong side of a military campaign. And now they stood in the sand, unarmed or barely armed, while a starved lion was released. The crowd loved these spectacles. The screams, the blood, the primal terror. It satisfied something deep and dark in the Roman psyche, but it was not sport. It was murder, dressed up as entertainment. Even among gladiators, there was hierarchy. The famous fighters looked down on the beast fighters, considered them beneath true warriors. Different profession, different status. The beast fighters had no chance of glory, only death. Quick if they were lucky, slow if they were not. But here is the cruelest twist. Some of these beast fighters survived. Not many, but some. And if you survived enough animal fights, if you killed enough beasts, you could potentially be promoted, elevated to actual gladiatorial combat, given real training, real weapons, real chances. This created a horrifying ladder. Start at the bottom, facing lions with a wooden stick. Survive that. Get promoted to fighting with a sword. Survive that. Maybe eventually earn enough fame to matter, to have fans, to negotiate, to live. Most died on the first rung, but the possibility of climbing kept some men fighting, kept them hoping, even when hope was absurd. The Roman satirist Martial wrote about a beast fighter who killed 20 lions in a single day. 20. The crowd went insane. This man, nameless before, became famous overnight. He was promoted, given proper gladiator training, eventually earned his freedom. But for every one like him, 1,000 died unknown, their stories lost, their names forgotten, their bones buried in unmarked pits. This was the foundation beneath the glory, the hidden machinery that made the spectacle possible. Rome fed the arena with human lives. Some became legends, most became fertilizer. And the Romans did not care, did not question, did not feel guilt, because to them, these men were not fully human. They were property, entertainment, disposable. The philosopher Seneca once attended the games. He left disturbed, wrote that the midday executions were worse than the gladiatorial matches. At least gladiators had training, skill, purpose. The midday victims were just butchered for laughs. But even Seneca did not question the system itself, did not suggest ending the games, just criticized the least skillful parts, as if professional murder was acceptable, but amateur murder was distasteful. This was Rome. This was normal. Thousands died for entertainment, and thousands more lined up, volunteered, were captured, were condemned to feed the machine. Because the arena was eternal. Its hunger was endless, and there would always be more bodies, more blood, more sand to soak it up. But the arena itself was about to face something it never expected. Something that would eventually bring the entire system crashing down. Not military defeat, not economic collapse. Something simpler, something more powerful. Moral exhaustion. Rome was about to discover that even entertainment has limits.
The games lasted for centuries, from the Roman Republic through the height of the empire. Hundreds of years of blood and sand. Thousands of gladiators, millions of spectators. The arena seemed eternal, unchangeable, as permanent as Rome itself. But nothing lasts forever, not even traditions built on blood. The end came slowly, not with a dramatic final match, not with imperial decree, but with erosion, gradual, inevitable, like waves wearing down stone. Christianity arrived. At first persecuted, Christians were thrown to the lions, became entertainment themselves. But they did not fight back, did not give the crowd what it wanted. They prayed, sang hymns, died peacefully. This confused Romans, frustrated them, made the spectacle less satisfying. And Christianity spread, despite persecution, because of persecution, some argued. Every martyr created more converts. Every execution backfired. By the 4th century AD, Christianity was no longer a fringe cult. It was mainstream, powerful, eventually official. Emperor Constantine converted. Suddenly, Rome's religion condemned the very games that defined Roman culture. But the games did not stop immediately. Too popular, too profitable, too embedded in Roman identity. Emperors tried to ban them. The bans were ignored. The games continued. Smaller, less frequent, but continuing. The change was cultural. Younger Romans, raised Christian, found the games distasteful. Not immoral necessarily, just boring, outdated. Their grandparents' entertainment. Why watch men die when you could attend chariot races, theater, other spectacles that did not require mass death? The economics shifted too. Gladiators were expensive. Training schools were expensive. Maintaining the arenas was expensive. And Rome was declining. Resources were limited. Barbarians were invading. Money that once funded games now funded armies. Survival over entertainment. The last recorded gladiatorial match occurred in 435 AD, not in Rome, in a provincial city. Small crowd, no famous gladiators, just a final, unremarkable fight. And then silence. The games ended not with spectacle, but with a whimper. But the legacy remained. The Colosseum still stands, 2,000 years later. Gladiator names are still carved in stone. Their stories still told, their influence undeniable. Modern sports inherited gladiatorial DNA. The arena became the stadium. The gladiators became athletes. The crowd's bloodlust was channeled into safer outlets: boxing, football, mixed martial arts. We still love watching people hurt each other. We just prefer they survive. The celebrity culture gladiators pioneered never died. It evolved, expanded. Today's athletes, actors, influencers, they are all descendants of Flama, famous for their physical performances,
worshipped by masses, commodified, their bodies marketed, their images sold. Even the contradictions remain. We adore celebrities while criticizing celebrity culture. We pay athletes millions while calling them overpaid. We worship influencers while mocking influencers. The same hypocrisy Romans practiced. We despise and desire simultaneously. Flama would understand modern fame perfectly. The endorsements, the merchandise, the fan obsession, the parasocial relationships. He lived it first, 2,000 years before Instagram, before television, before mass media. He was the original influencer, the first superstar, the prototype for every famous person who came after. Except he could not choose to retire, could not delete his account, could not escape his fame. He was trapped by it, defined by it, consumed by it. And he chose that. 4 times refused freedom, 4 times chose the arena, 4 times chose fame over liberty. Was he wise or foolish, hero or victim? We will never know, because Flama left no writings, no interviews, no autobiography, just a record. 21 wins, 9 draws, 4 refusals. 30 years lived, 34 fights fought. Numbers, not explanations. But perhaps that is fitting, because gladiators were always more symbol than human, more myth than reality. We project onto them what we want to see: freedom fighters, slaves, heroes, villains, victims, volunteers. They were all of these and none of these. They were simply men, trapped in a system bigger than themselves, making choices within impossible constraints, surviving however they could. Some found glory, some found death, most found both. Their names are carved in stone, scratched on walls, preserved in volcanic ash. Flama, Celadus, Crescens, Spartacus, names that outlasted emperors, outlasted Rome itself. Because fame, real fame, is forever. It transcends law, transcends status, transcends death. The arena is gone. The games are finished. Rome is ruins. But the names remain. The legends endure. The gladiators, 2,000 years dead, are more alive than most of us will ever be. Not because they were perfect, but because they were unforgettable. Not because they were heroes, but because they were human, flawed, complicated, contradictory, real. Gladiators were not just warriors. They were Rome's first celebrities, its biggest stars, its greatest contradiction. Legally worthless, culturally priceless, despised and adored, slave and superstar. And that paradox, that impossible combination of degradation and glory, is what made them immortal. The arena gates have closed. The sand is cold. The crowd is silent. But if you listen carefully, in the ruins of the Colosseum, you can still hear it. The roar, the names, the echoes of fame that refused to die. Flama, Celadus, Crescens, the Gladiators, Rome's superstars, forever.